Well, good afternoon, everybody. Today I want to talk about clean code. I guess most of you have read it or seen it once in your life. And I presume when you saw the title, you were like, does anyone actually don't recommend clean code? It's like a good book, right? Like everybody likes it, good principles, and why would anyone say don't read it? And I'm not here to say don't read it. I think it's a good book. I just want to change your point of view on some of the subjects, on some of the topics of the book. So first, the history behind the book. It was written by Uncle Bob, Robert, also known as Uncle Bob. And at the time when he wrote the book, basically he gathered some of the colleagues that had like many years of experience, and like, okay, it's like 2008. We need to like have a good book saying what do developers need to do to have a clean code. At the time, we didn't have clean code. We didn't have standards. We didn't have anything. It's pretty much when like Golf, like the Gang of Four, wrote also the book like about design patterns and everything. And the book was first published in August 1st, 2008. And at the time, it brought a lot of different things, a lot of paradigm, like good paradigm for coding itself. And today, 2023, 15 years later, we still talk about this book, right? So what is clean code? And here I want to talk about clean code itself, not the book. Because clean code nowadays is used as a book. But clean code is not about the book. It's about having a software that's readable, concise, maintainable. And once you read it, you're like, oh, okay, I understand what's written there. I'm pretty much sure that all the code you have worked in your life is like, oh, I don't understand what's written here. But that's like how software should do. We should like decrease the complexity. We should like have interfaces. We should have like things where it's like easy for us as a developers to extend, to modify, and without breaking things. So these are like all good principles, yes, and all of these are written in the book. So why am I saying, is it time to stop recommending the clean book, like the clean code book? What's wrong with the book? First of all, the book does bring bad examples. When I first read the book, 2018, I think, I was like starting in college. I was like, oh, okay, like this is like really good. Like now I can go to work and say, oh, your code is not clean. Your code is really bad because it's not following this, not following that. I have like something to go against people. Like I have something that gives me the power saying your code is not good. But is that actually true? Like, is that something we should actually do? Like the book also contradicts itself. Like it gives like a lot of examples, a lot of rules. Oh, you should do this, this, and this, and this. And then later on, the examples given by the book are not following its own own principles. And developers use it as a single source of truth. What do I mean by that? Well, developers usually read the book, and they go to the company, they're like, okay, see, the book says this, so why are you writing code like this? Your code is not clean. Let's refactor this, but it's working. So, like, I mean, of course, not only because it's working, you're gonna leave like some bad code, you need to write good code, but it's only because it's not following the book, like the principles of the book, doesn't mean the code is not good, right? And basically the book is a rule of thumb. It was written by a person who had many years of experience. Like there's no actually articles, like at least I have never seen any articles like, oh, if you write the code like this way, like developers will understand better. It's basically personal experience. That's something you get like with years of experience. When I look at the code I wrote when I started programming in 2016, I was like, oh, I understand, but it's such an ugly code. And then I read the book, I was like, okay, I can change this stuff a bit, but doesn't mean that I was like following the clean code all the time. Like, it's something that comes with feeling. You kind of see the code and you're like, oh, okay. It's ugly, it's not easy, but it's, as like mentioned earlier, one of like the technical that is something that it's feeling. You see the code, you see it's ugly, you see it's bad, and you know you have to improve it. And let's go through the contents, and I want to give some examples and see and say like what are my thoughts. Like I didn't put everything from the book here because there are many things, but I tried to compile like some of the stuff. So first thing, do not repeat yourself. The book says may be the root of all even software, which is kind of true. We just had the presentation of about how do they change like thousands of microservices to avoid repeating themselves and make things simple, right? Yes, and I agree, we should not repeat ourselves. That's a really good principle. But the problem with the book is like you should not have any duplication. If you use SonarCube, what happens? Oh, you have 2% duplication. Then what people do? We need to refactor. We need to avoid this, and then you start like having layers and layers of abstraction to have things that's not repeating itself, and then you have like very complex system where you like. It's okay to have some duplication. You don't need to eliminate all the duplication of your system. Some stuff, yes, it's good to remove the duplication, but doesn't mean that you should, oh, it's like 1% of the code is duplicated, so it's not a good code, it's not clean, we should like erase it, let's write it all over again. Like, I think that's like the biggest problem. People read the book, they're like, oh, the code is like a bit duplicated, so it's not following good practices, like bad code. And then another part of the book is about how the book says about Boolean arguments in methods, in functions. Like, oh, you should not pass Boolean arguments because that means the function is doing something different or more than one thing. And then following the example here, I have two codes. Basically, both of them do the same thing. Like, nothing actually changes. If you have a unit test, it's gonna work in the same way. The only difference is that if we follow the clean code book, the first example, the top one, is actually the cleanest way. But does it actually change something? If you see like the second one, like I have worked with people who see the second one, like, okay, I'm not gonna approve your pull request because it's not following clean code, so it's like a bad code, you're not a good developer, and that's what I don't agree. I think like that's the problem when people start like, oh, like you see like these could be like, it doesn't actually change anything. It's like a little bit of, just a little if. I didn't use it because from my perspective, this doesn't actually change. And that's what I think like clean code is about. Because everybody has a different point of view on coding. Like the way I see things, not the way you see things. And that's like the biggest difference. And then also one of the things that it says in the book is that, oh, you should be able to read the source code top to bottom. Let's be honest, who here actually opens file and starts reading as if it's a book? If you're like, start reading, you're like, this method, oh, you do. All right. If you open, like, okay, I want to see this method. You have like your IDE, you open it, you jump to the source code, you just jump around, and when you see you have like 10 different tabs open because you're just jumping around, you are not actually reading from top to bottom. Of course, it doesn't mean you have to leave it like all scrambled, like bad code. Like, I think you should follow like public methods first, or if you're like for Java or like public, private, like try to have some level organization. But I doubt it that at some point you're like, okay, I'm gonna leave top to bottom to see what this whole class does. Usually when like bug fixing or like writing the code, you just jump around and use the IDE to see the references. And here, like, there are a lot of topics that it's written in the book. Basically, for me, like, one of the biggest issues is like the last one. An ideal function is 2 or 4 lines of code long. Yeah, I agree. You should not have like big chunks of functions and like methods with like 300 lines or something like that. Of course, it's better to have like small things, but the book itself tries to bring like such little examples that's kind of annoying of how many methods and how many functions you have just to do. Sometimes like one of the functions like 1 line. So is it actually better to have a function with 1 line, or should we just implement this 1 line where the function is called? Like it's called like only once in only one single place. Why should I have like a separate function for that? And also it says like about the function should not be large enough to hold nested control structures, which from my point of view, from my understanding, that's like conditionals and loops. So how am I supposed to write code if I cannot have this? And like this goes on and on in the whole book. And here I have another example that's given by the book. This was refactored by Uncle Bob himself. And honestly, this is a really bad example. Like we just saw what we should not do and how functions should be named and blah, blah, blah. And then he gives two parameters. One is like candidate. The second one is n. What does n mean? This function, it changes the value of one of the private methods with, in the book also says the function should not have any side effects, but still does. And it multiplies by 2. I have no idea why is that, what's that 2? But that's also one of the examples from the book. And then we are reading this and we see this, we're like, oh, this is such a beautiful code because Uncle Bob wrote it. So it's the best code ever. But I don't actually agree on that. And then here, it's about side effects. Like this is a quote straight from the book saying that your functions should not have side effects. So if you call a function, it should not do something which is not planned to do. And then it basically gives like this whole source file, which he rewrote it, he refactored for like this beautiful source code, as he says in the book. And this new source code has 15 new private methods, and which you can see one of them is like only one single page. Like, of course, some of this is actually useful, but I don't agree this is actually that clean. It's just, you just split the problem into like another lines. So let's take the render method as an example. This method basically does everything that you don't think it should do. The method is called render, but it gives a Boolean, which Uncle Bob said in the book before, we should not give a Boolean parameter method, but he still uses in the book as an example. Then it changes the isSuite, the private attribute in the render method. Why? I don't know. It calls the isTest page, which doesn't use the isSuite attribute. And if it's a test page, it includes something which also doesn't use the isSuite. So why are we using the isSuite in the render method? Basically, when I look at this piece of code, given as an example, it's like you go to the gas station and like, I'm gonna pump the tires. And then you get down of the car, you go there, you press the buttons, and then you wait for a second, you get a vacuum cleaner behind the car, you go inside the car, you clean the car, you get into the car. You didn't pump the tires, you didn't do anything, you did a lot of stuff, but not what it was supposed to do. So when I see this code, that's what I feel. Like it's doing a lot of things that it shouldn't be doing, but we are using as an example as a good code. And then in the chapter 9 of the book, unit tests. What are unit tests? Fast, enable more confident to refactor, independent, repeatable, should be as voluminous as the code under the test, which I agree. All of these are very good things, and we should indeed do that when we're writing unit tests. Like that's the reason for unit tests. You can fail fast, you can fix things fast, so why are you like trying to make tests more complicated? And then he gives this example, which again, I think is a bad example. He refactors the top code to the bottom code. Honestly, I think the top one is much better to understand. In the book, he says he's like proud that he wrote the second one, but what way to code means? Like, is a method, what does it do? Like, I don't actually get it, what it's doing. Like, I see he removed a lot of the assertions, so why did he move a lot of the assertions? Like, this is a bit weird for me. Like, okay, I'm gonna call the method way to code. What is a way to code, and what is the method doing inside? Like, that's not actually clear for me. And then, let's raise the question, should we stop following the clean code? I don't think we should. Like, the book is actually really, really good. I only think the problem with clean code is when you're a beginner, you read the book and then you have a pattern. We as developers try to follow some guideline, we try to find something that will make us write the best code ever because we want to be the best developers, and that's the problem. Like, if you're a beginner, you don't know how to separate good examples from bad examples. And that makes you try to follow everything that's in the book, like, to its line. Like, you can actually, like, you cannot separate good examples from bad examples. And that brings me to recommend you a new book, A Philosophy of Software Design. It was published 2018. It's a great book. It doesn't bring as many coding examples, but it brings you to understand how to actually write code that's maintainable. Earlier today, we had a talk about technical debt and how do you write code without knowing if it's like lasts long and this kind of stuff. And this book brings great examples about technical debt and how much time you can spend writing code that's later on is gonna be to bite you in the ass, per se. Because basically what this book says is if you spend 20% of your time actually thinking before writing the code and writing code that you can have in the future, you will save 20% of your time in the future trying to refactor stuff that you don't understand what's doing. So that being said, I do want to say Clean Code is a great book. I mean, not great, a good book. This book is a great book. So I'm not against Clean Code. I think it's a good book. Please do read it, but don't use it as if it's no other source of truth. And that's all.
Thank you for this presentation. Yeah, I think what you said makes so much sense. But do you have any other Bible other than this what was the book called? Philosophy for Engineering.
Software design.
For software design. Would that be like now the book that you say that is worth following word by word?
Yeah, I wouldn't say like follow word by word. Like it all depends on the context. Like in software development, you cannot take something and say like, this is the single source of truth, let's do this. It's the same thing when like choosing a library. There is no library that's perfect for everything. You cannot find a thing like a library that's gonna fit every need. You need to understand the context and do the better out of it.
Questions? Who has read the book? Anybody has any feelings about the book? You do? You have a question? Yes.
Audience for this book is usually someone who has just learned like coding, maybe has been coding for a year or two.
Yeah.
And usually the saying goes, if you want to break the rules, first know the rules.
Yeah.
So I think this applies here too. So I would ask you, this other book that you recommended, is it meant for the same audience, like a newbie programmer, or is it?
Yeah, like independent of your level of programming, like if it's like beginner career, like if you're like more experienced, it's a great book because it brings examples not like as code, but as actually theory. You're reading like, oh, if I spend more time thinking about how this should connect, like even if you're a beginner, you can understand. Like it's not talking about complex things and anything. Like in my point of view, as a beginner or more experienced, it's a great book.
Thank you.
More questions?
Right.
No.
Right.
But let's then. Oh, there is one question. Is it Uncle Bob?
No, I'm not Uncle Bob. I'm the next speaker. When you use code generation language models, GPT-4 and the Codex and others, in your experience, do they generate, the clean code or something in between? Do they follow these recommendations?
Honestly, I have never used ChatGPT to write code. Like, I don't know. Honestly, I don't use ChatGPT at all. Overall, like I have used for some things, but like more technical questions, like, oh, these European standards, like how should I do something, but not about code. But from people that I have heard, they usually don't follow. They just generate some random code and then you have to clean up. So
you can tell it to clean it up. That's the good.
Yeah, exactly.
It's true. It's true.